Hi everyone, welcome back to Bite Marks. We haven't done one of these in a while.
Yep.
uh, but don't worry, Callum and I are back at it again to give you guys some thoughts that you might want to disagree with us about. Callum, what's been on your mind?
Um, well, I've recently been working on a different video, and it's pretty heavily about a certain thing, but I wanted to talk about something similar with you because there's been a lot of shows that have come out recently about video games,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are good, and some of them are not so good.
Most
And
of them are not very good.
eh, yeah, I mean, yeah. My mic doesn't pick up the noises that I make. That's annoying. Anyway, they're of middling quality,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering what goes into that. Is it a matter of does there have to be a pre-made story? Is it a Game of Thrones season 5 to 8 versus seasons 1 to 4 situation? You know?
Yeah. So for viewers at home, the Callum is referring to the fact that for the first couple of seasons of Game of Thrones, the writers and directors, the showrunners, were working from material that had already been written. Uh, a lot of the quality dip that is associated with the later seasons of Game of Thrones are because the production crew are running out of material to work from, because George R. R. Martin will do literally anything except for finish The Winds of Winter.
Yep, yep. I heard once that he was editing someone's sci-fi novel, and I was like, George, you have your own novels. Just like get on with it, my dude.
Yeah, yeah. It's context is important to a lot of things. I think one of the interesting things about the question of like context is first we have to talk about what do we mean when you talk about context. So I'll turn that over to you.
Well, I think context is just the bare minimum premise of a game,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a story of a game. So context can exist in multiplayer only games, like I guess you would consider a lot of fighting games multiplayer only, but they generally have a context. You know, there's a tournament. You all want to win the tournament because there's a great prize at the end. Whatever. And that's the context in which you play the game. But it can also be just basically the premise for a plot. So though the world around you is being corrupted by evil and we're waiting for the chosen hero, that's the context. The plot is you are the chosen hero to save the world.
Yeah, even multiplayer games that are very specifically about, like I think for example about like some of the earlier Quake games. Those games have very little that justifies doing rocket boosted team deathmatch. But I would argue that because those types of games have actually fallen out of favor, context is super important. Nowadays, pretty much any game that comes out has to have a reason to sell people on doing the thing. Even games that are like very multiplayer focused, especially games that are multiplayer focused, you need to give people a reason to get invested. Uh, the video game landscape has evolved because nowadays, if you want a game, you can go find it. Back in the day, back in the 90s, uh, your options for playing video games were extremely limited. And because that was the case, you could get away with a lot more, I think.
Yeah. That's why video games used to come with a book that
Oh,
tells you the
yeah.
entire story.
The book. One of the best parts about video games, in my mind, and unfortunately a part that has fallen by the wayside, is the book, the manual that comes
I
with the
kind of miss
story.
it.
I miss it too. I think for me, it was always, well, number one, it was always something to do on the ride back. Once you've bought the game from whatever game store you went to, you opened it up and you saw there was a manual. You could read the manual on the way home.
Oh, I had motion sickness. I never did that. But I did read the manual at like school or something when I was away from the game.
Yeah, yeah, I would do that too because video games, more than any other type of medium, responds to your engagement quite well, and therefore, if you're a game designer, you have to do quite a lot of work they get people hooked into your story, but once you've got them hooked, they will stay hooked.
It's so immersion is a word that people hate now because it's been used by literally every game journalist ever. But it really is a word that came about because of video games. And, well, maybe not because of video games, but video games made it popular. And it's something that video games do incredibly well because you are the action taker, you know? There's a better way to say that, but you're the one who has to do all this stuff.
Yeah, arguably no other medium of art can even do that, because video games are the only medium where your participation in the experience is actually integral to the experience, you know? The Mona Lisa still exists, whether or not anyone ever actually looks at it. But the actual experience of the game pretty much requires a person to engage with it.
I can just hear the furious typing of so many theoretical physicists.
Well, I'm glad to I'm glad you believe our audience has like loads of theoretical physicists.
I mean, if a friend of mine, I don't know if he does theoretical physics. Never mind. But anyway, so yeah, exactly. I heard somewhere the other day that video games are essentially the process of you helping the author tell a story.
Yeah,
and that's the best thing. But those stories need context. So let's get into the topic.
Okay, I think we have to really, if we're going to talk about context, I think we first have to talk about where video games were way back when. And this is just not an excuse for me to talk about old games. So,
yes,
some of the very first video games and video game experiences don't really have much in the way of what we would think of as context. Some of the very first video games, for example, like Pong, are emulating a real activity. So all of the context for that activity comes from the real world, which hypothetically people are familiar with. So, you know, you don't need to provide a context for Pong because you already know what table tennis is.
Yeah,
however,
but that's also a hard one to relate to our topic because it was before anyone assumed video games could have a story.
Yeah, exactly. The golden evolution, of course, was adding story elements into video games. But we see this in a variety of different ways because, of course, game developers didn't all converge onto the same types of stories. Even some of the very earliest, like, popular video games, things like Mario.
Adventure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We went for different time periods. That's fine.
Obviously, I think a big part of why video games have the context that they do is because part of the reason for their development is that they first develop as consoles and arcades, and then they move into the home.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we still had a live system long after it was necessary.
Yeah, there is kind of this reciprocal relationship between the way that we think of video games and the way that we play those games. Obviously, if we're playing, one of the founding to think about context here is like one of the reasons why arcade video games are so hard is because they're actually trying to take your money.
That's why you have lives, so that you think you have 3 chances, when in actuality it's a trick to take your money even better.
Yeah. However, that being said, despite the fact that it is a trick to take your money, it also kind of justifies why it's like one guy versus like the whole of New York in a beat 'em up, or a single starfighter against an entire, alien fleet. It's almost an accidental case of like, oh yeah, these games are all about like punishment and difficulty and reward and stuff, reward cycles. But contextually, they're that way because they're meant to suck money. But it had a story impact as well. It's very rare to find a video game in an arcade context that was purely about telling the story. Enter, of course, home development, home video games, where now...
Just before we move on from arcades for a minute, context doesn't necessarily need to be something that someone says to you.
Mm-hmm.
It can be purely visual. I mean,
yes.
Just from looking at Galaga or Space Invaders or whatever, you get the context of the situation.
Yeah, the thing that I was actually leading up to is that, like, when we start to think about context, we also have to really think about, like, what do games tell us in terms of how to play them, right? Like, this is going to be another podcast episode where we talk about tutorials, but, like, Yeah, when you play Doom, Doom doesn't sit you down when you first boot up the game and give you a tutorial of how to play it. In fact, it very quickly from the get-go just throws you into the deep end. Now, granted, Doom is not the first Doom. It's not the most mechanically complicated experience in the world. But I do think it's interesting that games back before the widespread development of a common gamer understanding, of an understanding in the public about what video games were, had very little to do with tutorializing. Mario does not tutorialize you. In fact, Mario is a great case of good visual design, because it tells you that, hey, you're going to be moving right, and you're only basically going to be moving right, But
you
nowadays,
have one thing you can do, it is jump. Enjoy.
yeah, it doesn't give you a lot of context beforehand. Obviously, your understanding of the story of Mario saving the princess, why he's a plumber, that's never really brought up. But it didn't need to do that.
What Bowser's gonna do with her?
Yeah, why? What even is the Mushroom Kingdom?
Like, does he want the Mushroom Kingdom? Is he holding her to ransom? No, that doesn't matter.
Yeah,
what matters is that you know her, you want to save her, jump and go right.
Yeah, it's interesting because video games are incredibly prevalent now. Video games are by far and away the most popular media on the planet. More people play video games now than they ever have. And in fact, it's to such a thing that I heard that there was a rumor, which is later proven to be false, that Amazon were actually thinking about buying EA.
God.
Yeah.
Oh no. You know that moment in Dexter's Laboratory where they fight each other, where they're trying to fight aliens and they accidentally blow up half of each other's robots, so they have to glue them together.
Oh yeah, I
make
remember that
mismatched giant. That's what I'm thinking of EA and Amazon, but it's just 4 Death Stars.
Yeah, yeah. If you're a game developer at Amazon-owned EA, you have to pee in bottles so that you can continue, I don't know, programming the next grind.
But you have to buy the bottles.
Yeah, you have
from
to buy the
them.
bottles.
And the bottles are made from the weaker developers.
Oh god, terrible. Luckily, the rumor turned out to be false, but you never know. It's one of those things. But to get back on track, so nowadays video game awareness is super out there, right? You don't have to. People know a lot more about games, and they know a lot more about game design and game language and stuff like that. So you don't need to give people as much context nowadays than what you used to, hypothetically, when you didn't have that much prevalence of game design or game awareness. But despite that fact, you have loads of tutorials nowadays. It's very rare. I play Ubisoft games; they have loads of tutorials, and I don't like them because they have too many tutorials.
There are a ton of tutorials, so I'm gonna propose that we come up with 3 and give them cute little names that we can refer to back later. The first one is going to be, I think, Follow the Lights.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is the roadmap, which is that awful one that Just Cause does, where it just gives you a picture of a controller with all of the buttons and what they do.
Ah, yeah.
And the last one is...
I'm gonna wait here while you do this. It's when the game stops and you have to push the button, and then it refuses to do anything until you push those buttons.
No, but that's Follow the Lights, isn't it? Because that's the one where you it says, look up to that light over there, look over that light over there, and shows you how to work the camera.
Okay,
and it inevitably leads to you running at some point and having to go under a log.
I suppose maybe the third type of tutorializing is where they do a text dump. They just dump a bunch of text in front of you, like text boxes.
Oh, yeah, like text boxes, like signs.
Yeah.
Or little things, yeah. So that
it's not explicitly the controller. It's actually just instead of having a controller with hey, you're going to be pushing the X button. It's here's a text dump, a bunch of text that tells you to push the X button, right?
Yeah. Here is a moment in which you might need to press the X button. Press X button now.
They do that a lot in MMOs, I've noticed.
Yeah, they also do that in Cuphead.
Yeah, that's true. Cuphead.
Lots of overlap between Cuphead and MMOs.
Yeah.
Both fill you with a sense of dread.
Yeah. Both are also sometimes incredibly very frustrating. Okay, so we have our foundation. We've got follow the lights, the roadmap, text boxes. Each type of tutorializer definitely gives you some context for the game that you're playing. Of course, the best way to do a type of tutorial is always the show don't tell approach, right?
Yes.
It's to give the player a feeling that the next thing that they should do is the actual thing that you want them to do, but never like scold them or railroad them. You always want the design of the gameplay to lead people like breadcrumbs to the next thing that they're supposed to do, and that of
Yes.
course takes place in a wider context of trying to make them aware of the mechanical and also story elements of your game. Um, it's an example that I think of is Half-Life, right? Half-Life has a tutorial. It will point a button, but the actual it'll flash up, hey, push this button to do that thing. But really, the whole first part of Half-Life, just putting the crystal in the machine and stuff like that, all of that is meant to more than teach you how to play the game. It's actually meant to just give you the vibe, right? It's meant to establish that Gordon is a new scientist at this crazy experimental facility. Stuff's a little bit shady, but not so shady that you would, immediately begin to get suspicious. And the interesting thing about that tutorial is that when you play the game for a second time, you notice a lot more, right? That's something that I think is very interesting with regards to how we think about context, right? Because the second time you play through the Half-Life tutorial, you notice like a lot more details. You'll notice like the G-Man will show up at a couple of times. Your understanding of the people and the story events and like their relationships also deepens. And it also, again, because you know how to play the game, you go through the tutorial much more quickly. When I first played the Half-Life 1, I would just like very casually just like walk around, not try to like jump on anything crazy, not really test the limits of what the game would let me do. I would just go along the path. But the second time I played it, I would just kind of do whatever I could to get the NPCs to finish talking so I could do the next thing.
You and I are very different people, because I was consistently jumping around and standing on stuff in my first playthrough.
Really? Why is that?
Because I don't know, I don't like standing around listening to nerds talk. I'm a big, strong nerd with a super suit and a gun. I should be able to do things. But yeah, I think the main example for me would be Mega Man X, which I haven't finished yet. I'm on the last stage of it, but I played it recently, and there's actually a great sequelitis video by Egoraptor, who is incredibly famous. If you don't know him, go and look him up. He has a great one on Mega Man X as well. But basically, it has one of the best examples of show don't tell tutorializing I've ever seen. And you can go through it essentially screen by screen and just see how it works. I mean, like, the first enemy is one of these rolling wheel things to teach you that you can jump over certain obstacles, but also because it's the first thing that you're going to see, it's going to hit you, and you're going to see, oh, I can take damage. Like, it's not one hit kills here. Okay. And then you get one that it's like a mini boss. It doesn't have a health bar or anything. It's just you kind of have to keep hitting it until it dies, and that shows you it when it dies, it crashes the ground down into a pit. You have to wall jump out of the pit, and it's a really, and the best part of it is that it leads into its gameplay, its story with gameplay. You fight a mini boss named, it's something with the W, I've forgotten, and he hands you your ass, basically. He's in this giant robot suit, he's really good, and he absolutely destroys you. And then your partner Z destroys him. Like, starts doing all of these cool moves like charge blasts and dashing and stuff, and absolutely wrecks him. And he gets away, and Z helps you out and says, "Don't worry, you'll get stronger someday." And it's immediately leading. Sorry?
No, go on.
And it's immediately leading you to think like, oh, I'll be strong enough to fight that guy one day. And then you go through the game, and every piece of upgrade that you get makes your armor look more like Z's armor.
Ah, okay, yeah. So that's another example, because it's like the game is trying to lead you down a set of breadcrumbs, and it sounds like the very first parts of it establish like this massive chain that you're going to unravel as you play the game until you get to the end, where every little bit in the chain actually makes sense.
Yeah. It's the kind of game that knows that this is going to be a long journey, and needs you to have a strong role model / goal. And that's what Z is. So they have to establish very early, Z is cool. You want to be like Z. Or Z, I guess, because it's American. Well, no, it's Japanese. Would they pronounce it Z?
I have no idea, actually.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, a little bit.
I know they can't. I know there's no V sound in Japanese, so it's bui.
Yeah.
But
you dropped that. You dropped that one on me last. No, on Thursday.
Yeah. Okay. Well, moving on from that, I think context is definitely an important facet of video games that can be delivered in so many different ways, but how much of it is enough?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, like I said, going back to the fact that like video game proliferation is everywhere, you would think that nowadays we don't actually need a lot of context to get into something, right? If I am just dropped into, I don't know, another Fear game or another Halo game or something like that, I very quickly will understand what's going on in terms of the core themes, because I've been exposed to other things, you know, previously in the series, or things that are related to it. You know, but then again, I think one of the issues for game developers and why this context is important is because they don't know. A game developer should never assume that the first time someone's playing your game, that they already know what the score is, right? They always have to make the assumption that the first time that they're playing your game is the first time they're playing, you know, potentially any game.
A game, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because we don't really have this for any other. Like, no painter is painting a painting, or no.
This is the first time anyone will have seen red.
Yeah, yeah, or an author is like, this is the first time someone's ever seen an ampersand next to a question mark, you know?
People are gonna use my book to teach their children how to read.
Yeah, yeah, people don't do that with other types of medium. Whereas game developers have to assume that, at least loosely, that the first time someone's playing your game is maybe potentially the first time they're playing any game. And that's a really different kind of expectation on both the audience and also, you know, the designer, because it means that they have to have a level of intentionality with everything that's higher than normal, because if they don't, players will get lost. You know, I read a statistic that like, or I heard a statistic rather, that like most MMO players, or actually not even MMO players, it's like most people who play games on Steam will never get past like the first, you know, hour or so of gameplay. There are loads of achievements on Steam where you see them. It's like 1% of, less than 1% of the player base has it.
Yeah.
And it's because people need a reason to play your game. If they don't have a reason to play your game, you don't give them a compelling reason, they will not.
and that's this catch-all sort of argument for that, where it's like, oh, they should play the game because the game is fun. It doesn't really work like that. Fun gameplay is great on a moment-to-moment level, but context and story is what like hooks you outside of the game. Sorry?
No, I was about to say, there are like primary, secondary, and tertiary gameplay loops, right?
Yeah.
And the moment-to-moment gameplay is the primary loop, which has to be good, right? But even if the game has a bad primary loop, you can still save it if the secondary and tertiary loops, which are more about story, are actually compelling. An example that I would give of this is something like Well, for me, Darkest Dungeon.
Really?
I don't actually like a lot of the moment-to-moment gameplay. I find it, especially on the harder difficulties, it's so stressful that I actually want to stop playing the game. But the tertiary loop, uncovering the mystery, is really compelling. I really like sending the expedition out and getting back the loot and uncovering more of the story of the game. But I don't actually like the moment-to-moment gameplay. I find it very stressful. I put up with it because that's the only way to get the other, content that I want. But I think that you need to, and it does that because Darkest Dungeon has a very compelling context. I am incredibly compelled to find out the mystery of this crazy Eldritch Abomination nightmare story.
Yes. And on the flip side, I'm just going to piss off so many people by saying this. The exact opposite for me is Death Stranding.
What? Really?
I really like the gameplay. I think it's
like the
interesting.
story.
I hate the story. I don't care about the story in the slightest. Because it's not poorly written. And it has a good premise. It's just, it's told to me through like 45-minute cutscenes. After about 15 minutes of gameplay.
Yeah, Death Stranding is Kojima at his most Kojima.
Yep. But the gameplay is cool. It's interesting. You have to deliver things, and I played it during the pandemic, so it was very poignant. But you have to deliver things and make sure that you're not over balanced on one side, so that you don't tip over. And you have to like take care of yourself. You have to rest. You have to drink energy drinks and eat food, and make sure that you don't get too close to the spooky ghosts.
Yeah, it is kind of weird how Kojima managed to. Again, this is why context is important, because on the one hand, Kojima managed to make a very compelling simulator game, right? That's what it is, like a truck simulator, except you are driving the truck.
You are the truck.
You are the truck, yeah. You.
Martin Reedus is the truck.
Norman Reedus.
Norman Reedus is the truck.
Yeah, he's the truck. And that's very compelling because obviously people love playing those types of games. But the meta context of that game kind of, it'll put a lot of people off. I definitely don't.
And look, I'm not. I enjoy weird stuff, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not some squeamish normie, some middle person. I keep trying to think of a fun way to describe this, and my brain keeps going like, I don't know if you should say that, champ. But yeah, I like weird stuff. I'm fine with the visions of Norman Reedus at a beach with dead baby and floating ghost people and whatever. It's just that when Mr. Deadman Man comes onto the screen with his goofy Halloween mask, and he's trying to have a very serious conversation with you about taxes or something, I'm like, I can't care about this. I cannot care. I don't have the capacity in my body to care about this. It's like how Phantom Pain was fine for a long time until you rescue Ocelot, and then he says, we're not dogs. We're not junkyard dogs. We're diamond dogs. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard an adult man say, and I live on the internet. Kojima, stop. And like, at that moment, I just can't care anymore. It's like, ugh.
Yeah, it's very important to have that sort of context, because if you don't give the player a reason to play the game, they're not going to, right? Or at least they're going to give up, right? Not every person gives up because they're like Dark Souls is a great example, because there's very little context for whatever is going on in Dark Souls. Arguably, the point of the Dark Souls game is to contextualize the game for yourself, right? That's why I say every playthrough of Dark Souls is personalized, because technically, from a story perspective, and this is again going to sound like a hot take, but like from a story perspective, you're done with the game when you decide that you've understood it,
Yeah. It's like how in Half-Life you can decide your own level of involvement in the story. You can sit there and wonder why the military is killing scientists when they arrive. Or you can just be like, new enemies, fun.
Yeah, there are multiple layers that you can go down, and it's important for the player to depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell, because obviously context, does matter to story, but it's important that the context of your game supports the story that you're trying to tell, or the type of gameplay that you're trying to tell, right? I would argue one of the major problems with Death Stranding is that the type of story that Kojima wants to tell is completely incongruous with everything else about the gameplay that he's building.
You know what's weird is that Kojima writes gameplay like you're kind of in a weirdly violent Ghibli movie, but he writes cutscenes like you're in a mecha anime with lots of soft science and stuff. It's the weirdest thing. Because the gameplay is always like, oh, you have to do this to fight against the great evil and everything, and this is all righteous because you're saving hundreds of lives. And then the cutscenes are like, yes, the beta particles are coming clearly through the Metal Gear system and such. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What? You can't just invent words.
Someone said it best when they said Kojima's always wanted to make movies, but Hollywood will never let him.
Yeah, because his movies would be 60 hours long.
Yeah,
you'd have to watch them on 10 discs.
Yeah, that's true. The interesting thing about Kojima is that in a way he actually has his own context, right? If you are even a little bit aware of what Metal Gear or even Kojima type games are like, then that's infinitely different to just imagine just playing Death Stranding for the first time and that's the first game you've ever played.
Oh god, you would. That's where the puritanical games are evil movement starts.
Yeah, and it's because it's interesting, but hypothetically that's not impossible, right? It is very possible that someone is going to play Death Stranding and that's going to be the first game they've ever played.
Oh, and they're probably a Walking Dead fan, and they saw Norman Reedus on the cover, and they were like, "Oh, cool! It's like a space game." And then you're high-tech delivery man, daycare person. Why do I have a baby in a jar strapped to me all the time?
Yeah, like Death Stranding, Norman Reedus. Is this a Walking Dead game?
But while we're talking about Japanese developers, there's two things I want to bring up. I don't want to get away from Dark Souls too much.
Yeah.
Because we've had a conversation about that and I want to get into it. But another developer who has like a context about him, Suda51.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
So we had another topic for this video before that we might end up making a different episode for like the patrons and stuff. It was just too vague. And it's basically game design decisions that only the developers wanted, not the players. Suda51 was going to be my ace in the hole for that debate. Because, holy shit.
Yeah, his games are very indecipherable, even to fans of the series.
You could make a career out of, like, trying to do a literary criticism of No More Heroes alone.
Yeah, I've always wondered what the deal was with the lightsaber.
It's very simple. Suda51 really likes Star Wars and jerking off, Amelia. I don't know what else to tell you. Why it looks like a PVC light fixture, I don't know.
I'm actually in the process of making a video about lightsabers. And I was actually going to use Suda51 as an example in the point that I was making, but I just think it's too weird.
But what about a lollipop chainsaw?
Yeah.
Where he basically plagiarized one of his other games.
Again, these people are... so don't take away from these comments that I actually don't like these game developers and that I don't want them to make more games. I absolutely want them to make more games. I want them to have more freedom to make crazy weird stuff because I
don't like Kojima games. I don't want them to stop.
No, absolutely not.
If there's one thing that this current gaming industry needs with all of its homogeny and Ubisoft towers and stuff, it is weirdos like Suda51 and Hideo Kojima making weird shit.
Yeah. Yeah, we need more people to make stuff like that because, like you said, things are becoming more homogenized. To circle that back to to context, I think it's the genesis of this video, at least as you pitched it to me, was that what happens if you take someone out of context with no context and you make them experience the art. I think we touched on that a little bit, where it's like, if depending on the game, right, it could be completely deleterious to someone's experience to have no context of video games in general. Like, what if Death Stranding was the first game you ever played? That would be I would actually love to see that experiment. I would love to see someone actually play Death Stranding for the first time.
I don't
and that's
know
the first
anyone
game
who's
they've
never played games.
Yeah, me neither, right? So
We'd
it's
have to pay one of our parents.
Yeah.
Get them on
hey,
camera.
subscribe to the Patreon so we can.
Yeah, if we reach the Patreon goal of being able to buy an office, we'll do that.
Yeah, but so it's like, it is weird, and to circle all the way back, like, they are making TV shows of games now, right? Games in their context have remained relatively fixed, right? Because game movies have never generally been very good, and despite attempts, there have never been very many successful attempts to broaden the game market into other media.
Yeah. It's so weird, too, because they keep trying to do it with fighting games. Like Dead or Alive. The Dead or Alive movie kind of slaps, though. But Mortal Kombat, Tekken, the new Tekken series has just come out. I haven't seen it. I've heard it's bad.
Is that because... Oh, sorry.
Yeah? No, you
No,
were saying?
I was just going to say, is that because... Is the reason why they do that is because everyone is already at least tangentially related to... familiar with the concept of, like, a fighty martial arts movie.
Well, that's the thing, is that generally fighting games don't have a very crazy big story. I mean, Tekken's a bad example, because in Tekken 7, Jin is looking for his dad, because his mom gave him the devil factor, which turns him into a demon. His dad also has that now. Heihachi attacks the world. There's a comet rain because they destroy a bunch of satellites. Marshall Lee is helping Ling, who is a Chinese detective, and it fucking becomes Rush Hour, except with Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan this time.
I would love to watch that movie.
It's so wild. The story for Tekken is insane. And that's the thing with fighting games, is that on the outset, there seems to be a very basic concept, A very basic context is like, oh, there's a tournament. The Tekken tournament, the King of Iron Fist tournament.
Yeah. Find out who's the strongest fighter.
That's why at the end of the game, if you win the arcade mode with whatever character, it shows you what they do with all the money. Like, in one of the games, I think it was Tekken 4, Ling Xiaoyu buys an amusement park. And that she just, like, is happy forever. She's the best.
Power to her. What a queen.
Yeah. But, like, if you really look behind the scenes, it gets so much more wild. Because, yeah, guess what? Jin and Kazuya? Jin and Kazuya. I haven't played Tekken in a while. They are both demons. Literal, actual demons. They have a gene in their body that turns them into demons.
So hell is real.
Yeah, Kazuya and Heihachi have their final fight inside a volcano.
Oh my goodness. Now I'm starting to remember why I don't really play fighting games.
It's so good. I love it. I love over-the-top shit like that. And the movies just aren't that. They can't capture that same vibe, because it's like when an animated movie gets a live-action adaptation.
Oh, Avatar, yeah.
Yeah, losing the animation means that you can't be as over-the-top, because you're using actual people.
Yeah, so actually I have two questions for you with regard to that. So question one is, like, do you think that there's a part of the, speaking of the context, but do you think there's like a mechanical context that needs to be translatable for the actual show or movie or whatever to work? That's question one. And question two is, why do you think Why do you think it's important to actually get the context over into the media?
Okay, so question one. Mechanically, I think...
Because like story wise, obviously, if you don't have that, then why are you even adapting the medium? Right? We'll talk
Yeah.
about this when we talk about Halo.
Okay, mechanically, especially with like fighting games or something like that, the characters have signature moves.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't represent that kind of stuff, like imagine if the Witcher series had come out, and the Witcher and Geralt doesn't use signs.
Yeah, yeah. The thing about video games is that mechanics of story have generally they blend together. So Geralt is a Witcher. He's got magic powers. Therefore, in gameplay context, you can use signs.
Yeah. And
and-
they have to be a specific kind of thing. They're in the context of the world of The Witcher. Signs are less powerful than some magic, but more powerful than other kinds of magic. So, like, signs are basically mid-tier magic spells that only witches use because they're not quite sorcerers.
Yeah, but they're not quite normal people either. They're kind of like weirdo
They're-
mutants.
Yep. And it just makes them really hard and unable to have kids.
Yeah, and also immune to STDs.
Yeah, basically. Wild. It's almost like this mutation thing pretty much has no downsides. Other than it kills you sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you wanted to have kids, but you can always adopt,
Yeah. There's a lot of kids
Which-
out there in the world. You can
which
just,
is-
like, buy one.
which is what technically Geralt does. Sirius is adopted.
Isn't that wild? That adoption is basically just purchasing a child?
Well,
Anyway. Food for thought. The second question... But basically, look at how upset people got by Geralt only using one sword. Right?
Yeah.
Where in the game he uses two. One for humans, one for monsters. Because monsters don't get hurt by steel. That's also a reason why normal humans can't fight against them. But the show is very clever about that. It's like, the reason normal humans can't fight against monsters is because they just don't have the reflexes. Which is a thing that is present
True.
in the games.
Yeah, Geralt does have superhuman reflexes.
Yeah, and it says, like, that's why they needed the witches there, because the witches are basically half monster. They can fight against them. If you made, say, a Street Fighter show, and Ryu doesn't use a Hadouken,
He's not
that
real.
is... Yeah, that's taking away a signature part of who he is. That's a famous thing that Ryu can do. There's that... I don't know all of the Street Fighter character names, so I have to be very careful here. Oh, Blanca. Blanca is the weird green dude who
Yeah,
can use
with the orange
electricity. Yeah. If you take away that, then what is he now?
Yeah, imagine if Blanco was just like a guy. Not he was just a guy.
He was just like a guy. I'm fine with it if you change it to be a bit more realistic. Like, he doesn't actually shoot electricity over his body. He just wears, like, a bunch of stun guns.
Oh, he has
or
like
something.
shock gloves.
Yeah, if you change it like that, that could be interesting. But you do still have to have that in some form.
So what you're actually alluding to is that there is a core essence that comes along with the context of any video game. And once you've established that context, if you deviate too far away from it, then you actually don't have the thing anymore. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. However, I do think that there are cases where deviation is necessary or it adds something to the property.
Such as?
Well, like Cuphead.
Cuphead. Mm-hmm.
I quite like the Cuphead show.
Ah,
Because it's chill and funny and it's well animated.
the animation is quite gorgeous, yeah.
But it is very different from the game in terms of just the most basic premise. Where in the game, you lose your soul to the devil
And you gotta
because you go
debt
to his
collection.
casino. And then, yeah, basically you have to go around killing people.
Yeah, you gotta go do debt collection.
Yeah. The premise of the game is that you're collecting all of these people's souls to pay off the devil so that you don't have to give him your soul. But you lose it in a casino.
Yeah.
In the Cuphead show, he still owes the devil his soul, but he loses it playing basically... What's that ball game where you roll the ball up the lane and it has to go into a hole at the end that you see in arcades?
Oh, like is it called like skee ball?
Skee ball, yeah. He has to play skee ball basically, and he loses at one point, and he owes the devil his soul now. So it's very much toned down. But that works because it's aimed at kids, and the Cup show, the Cup show, the Cuphead video game format wouldn't work for a show because it takes place technically over one day with a bunch of boss fights.
You couldn't. Yeah, so it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that. So, like, there are various different ways that games can exist. And, like, for example, people have always talked about how, like, a Half-Life show or a movie would be good, right? I'm not necessarily convinced. Because Gordon Freeman doesn't talk. So if you cast him as a character and he talked, anyone who knows anything about Half-Life would find that really, really weird, right? So you'd either have to be incredibly clever and find a way that the actor playing Gordon, never actually has to talk because other people are talking for him or some crazy stuff is happening, or you have to tell a very different kind of story.
Yeah, it's like why there can't ever be a Dark Souls movie or a TV show.
Or why the Monster Hunter Monster movie was terrible.
Was it?
Yeah,
I never watched it.
The Monster Hunter with Mila Djokovic, the lady from Resident Evil, it's not at all like Monster Hunter. It's basically just like a very weird, very loosely inspired show about like how the U.S. military. It doesn't make like the army shows
U.S.
up.
military?
Yeah, the U.S. military.
I didn't think the United States existed in the Monster Hunter world.
It doesn't, which is why, again, we're talking about context. Like, the Monster Hunter movie establishes a completely different context from the context of the show. I mean, from the video game. And as a result, it's not really good. If you like the show, I mean, if you like the game, I don't know why I keep calling it a show, but if you like the game, I don't think you'd like the movie. And I don't think the movie on its own has any real redeeming qualities.
It's one of those movies that rarely only gets by having the same name.
Yeah, that's... Speaking of, I think it's time we talked about the Halo show.
Oh god, wait, before we talk about the Halo show, can we talk about something good?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Castlevania.
Castlevania. Why?
Yeah.
So, as a counterpart, why is Castlevania good? Even though, obviously, the show is not a It's not a Metroidvania where you have to, like, go through different episodes, experience, like, finding the order yourself.
I think because very much Castlevania ignores a lot of the background story of the series. Because the Castlevania show came out very recently, well, fairly recently, and all of the background story about the games was known.
Is it?
However, what?
No, I was about to say, is it possible that one of the reasons why Castlevania did well, whereas Halo didn't necessarily do so well, is because the context that actually matters is the story, not the mechanics.
Yes.
And you could hypothetically make another Castlevania game with very different mechanics, but keep the story components intact, and people might still recognize it as a Castlevania game.
I don't know about that. I think for the show, the story was the only thing that was important. And I think what they did was a very smart thing. I don't know this for sure, but I think they only took one game to adapt, and that was Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, which is... It has the characters Trevor, Alucard, and Cypher, and whatever, and it's basically that story. The very basic premise is the same as the show, but then they just went further into those characters' stories.
Yeah, almost in a way, you could say that a show like Castlevania fulfills a niche or a space that the game actually leaves out, because Castlevania games don't have much in the way of character exploration and character progression and stuff like that. It's more about the gameplay.
In the time of Castlevania 3.
Yeah, it's a lot more about the gameplay experience than it is about the actual, like, characters,
Yeah, and to answer your previous question, that's why I don't think Castlevania could come with new gameplay and still be recognized as a Castlevania game, because it's so deeply ingrained in the context of that game in the game industry that it is a Metroidvania. It literally contributes to the back half of that word. I don't think Castlevania could become a beat 'em up and then still be recognized as a Castlevania game. I think people would immediately assume it was a spin-off.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's very true. But I still think that there is an essence of Castlevania that can translate from, because like there are other games that can operate in the similar context of Castlevania that aren't Castlevania games. In fact, perhaps maybe we can argue that if a context becomes solidified enough, it actually just becomes a genre.
I think what we're stumbling onto here is that there's no one thing that makes a game. It all has to work in tandem with each other. The context, the story, I keep saying the context of the story as though that means anything. The context, the story, and also the gameplay, and the visuals, and the audio design, it all has to work together to make one whole product.
Did you clarify for our audience the difference between the context and the story?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. We've been doing this for a while.
Yeah. Alright, I do want to talk about Halo, because I don't feel like we can talk about video game shows with context and stuff like that. So, I'm a massive fan of Halo. I've read loads of the books. I've played almost all of the games. I'm like a Halo fan, in the extreme.
You can just say virgin, Emilio. There's a word for that.
Yeah, but the thing about the Halo games, of course, is that they operate on multiple tiers. If we're talking about context, the only context that you really need to play Halo is you need to know that it's an FPS. But if you really want to get into the story of Halo, there's loads of things that Halo doesn't actually tell you that are involved in the story. Stuff about the Forerunners and the Flood and all kinds of other like crazy epic sci-fi stuff. Bungie, before they made Halo, they made like Marathon. And Marathon is a very weird game with like weird space alien stuff, and a lot of that stuff is actually in Halo. It's just not told to you, because Bungie realized that a lot of that stuff is actually, from a story perspective, very confusing and very weird, and it detracts from the simple story, But the Halo show breaks from a lot of conventions with the context that we've come to know about Halo, right? So for starters, there are some minor things. Master Chief shows his face a lot. He takes his helmet off. Yeah, Master Chief...
No, isn't his face supposed to be like deeply scarred or something?
Yeah, well, Pablo Schreier, I think that's the actor, he takes his helmet off frequently. Now, I understand why they did that, because from a movie context, you don't want your star actor to have his face covered all the time. But I would point you like the Judge Dredd movie with Carl Urban, where he never takes the helmet off once.
Or The Mandalorian.
Or The Mandalorian, right? Because it's important to the context that you've established for the character. Master Chief never takes off his helmet, except in incredibly rare circumstances, Arguably, you can count the number of times that it's actually happened, I think, on like one hand. And it's almost never just for casual stuff, right? He takes his helmet off like very casually,
Yeah, he should take his helmet off to like eat privately.
Yeah, well, you never actually see him eat, but it's
what?
It's those things
what?
that
What does he take his helmet off for?
Well, technically, if I'm not mistaken, there's like some deep Halo lore that the suit is actually giving him nutrients. The one time he does take the helmet off is at the end of Halo 4, where he's getting a suit upgrade. So they take him out of the armor, and he has to take the helmet off. But Master Chief, the reason why Master Chief doesn't take off the helmet is, number one, so that you can better project yourself into his role, right? Master Chief can hypothetically, be anyone under the helmet, even though, he's actually a character. That's
John 1:17.
John 1:17. But, it's important to the lore of the universe in the way that he behaves. The other thing is, of course, they changed some major details with regards to the Covenant. The Covenant are different in the Halo show. They're not as... Well, number one, they're not as threatening. They don't necessarily present the same level of threat that they do in every Halo game. The Covenant are almost on the cusp of winning, They're only defeated because of Master Chief and his amazing ability to shoot two guns at the same time. But the Covenant are also the Covenant are also incredibly contextualized as having a core set of beliefs. You know, they're incredibly religious. They hate humans. Why do they hate humans? Well, the reason for that is because the leaders of Covenant, the prophets, are actually jealous of humanity because they recognize that humans were actually the original people who either they worshipped or were the object of their worship. It's complicated nonsense. But the point is, the Covenant have a religious reason for hating humans and just killing them on sight. And diplomacy had comprehensively failed. So Halo establishes this as a fact for like the first game and arguably for the second game, but then it subverts that expectation by humanizing some of the Covenant and giving you like splinter groups in them.
Yeah,
This
like
version-
the Arbiter.
The Arbiter. They
Arbiter.
form the Swords of Sanghelios. Later on in the story, but like there are humans. The Covenant kidnapped a human, and that human wants to. It's very messy. Like I said, I stopped watching the Halo show just because it didn't feel like. So here's my main point. I don't think Halo was a bad show because they added more women to it or they added more people of color. That has always actually been a thing in Halo because
Yeah, you're one commander, and the very first like sergeant you meet in Halo 3 is a person of color.
yeah, but also importantly, like the only time you really go to Earth, you go to Africa.
Yep.
You go to Mombasa, New Mombasa,
Kenya.
which is this massive mega city, right? One of the contexts that Halo establishes that Africa is not an undeveloped place anymore. Africa is actually maybe kind of like a superpower. So yeah, it is. None of the diversity reasons are the reasons why Halo is bad. The problem is it doesn't feel like Halo. It doesn't feel like all of the context that has been established. And I think one of the major problems is they didn't know what they were going to adapt, per se, right? They weren't necessarily adapting any of the video games or any of the books. They just kind of picked and chose different elements and, put it together.
So, why would you do that?
Well,
Frankenstein monstered the Halo series.
Yeah, it's strange because Halo does have a lot of canon that like for example, my favorite Halo story actually is nothing to do with Master Chief. It's Halo ODST, right? Which is about a bunch of guys who are ODST. They're like special forces guys. They come down in drop pods, and it's all about their struggle in Mombasa, in New Mombasa, right? It's a totally different story with Nathan Fillion, I think, is in it. There's like a whole bunch of different side stories that are going on, but it's a very human story, and it's a very well-told story, and it really stuck with me. Halo ODST is one of my favorite Halo games, besides some of the others. And that could have totally been the story that they could have told, right? I felt like that would have been perfect for adaptation for the screen, because it has a lot of character moments, there's lots of interpersonal drama. One of the main criticisms, of course, that you could leverage at Halo, the mainline series, is that it's basically just Master Chief and himself talking to Cortana for most of the time. And that doesn't really makes for very compelling gameplay, because you're in the seat, the context has been established. But when you take him out of that context, when you try to insert Chief into other wider military contexts, he doesn't fit, because he's like a crazy lone wolf super soldier.
I think you could do a very good comedy with Halo, where it's just Chief by himself being lonely. It's just like, hey Chief, what's up Chief, how's it going? And then Cortana comes in and is like, what are you doing? I'm shooting the Covenant, leave me alone.
I'm pretty sure there's like Halo machinima about that. But yeah, it's weird because it doesn't feel like Halo, and it doesn't work on any of the conventions that we've established thus far. Also, probably one of the reasons why some of the newer Halo games are so divisive is because they try to do story elements in a very different way, and that's a conversation we can have on another day. But yeah, I think the Halo show is a great example of why context matters, because if you're going to be adapting a thing and you're going to call it the Halo show, you have to really think about the context of what it is that you're trying to adapt and how you can bring it to the screen. They have like FPS segments where sometimes the camera will transition to first person view, and that's pretty cool. I mean, the Doom movie did that. But like the Doom movie is another great example of like the original Doom was not about like aliens, and it was literally about demons from hell. And it didn't need a story. It didn't actually really have much of a story. So their attempts to create one, kind of Anyway.
Well, before we move on to the next thing, which I do want to talk about, I think we're going to go over an hour a bit just to make up for all the stuff we cut. I do want to talk about the Dota show
Yeah.
versus Arcane,
Okay.
and why Arcane works and why Dota doesn't. But before that, just on topic of like adaptions and stuff, if you have books, adapt the books.
Yeah.
Because those are far more coherent, like, story-only things.
I personally do think they should have adapted some of the Halo books, actually.
Yeah, I mean, look at The Witcher. The Witcher doesn't always have great writing, the show, but the story's consistent and a good premise for the adventures.
Yeah,
because it was taken from the books.
And when they ran out of runway on Game of Thrones, that's when things started to really fall off the wagon.
Exactly.
That's also...
And also, there's a bunch of Halo books that are really good.
Yeah.
And have nothing to do with Master Chief.
Yep. Stuff with Oni and things like that. I also think that's probably why some people like the House of the Dragon. And why it probably won't end up being as bad, because the story's already been written. They don't have to,
I'm enjoying House of the Dragon so far, but, like, there's a bunch more episodes to go. Let's keep ourselves tentatively...
optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so you were saying.
Dota versus Arcane. Dota 2, the show, is just The Witcher. Again, but with Dota characters. You cannot look at the Dragon Knight Fortress thing and tell me that that isn't Kaer Morhen. And you can't tell me that when Terrorblade makes all the dragons attack it, it doesn't have the exact same energy as the monsters attacking Kaer Morhen in the Blood of the Wolf movie. That they did for The Witcher.
That's a hot take.
It is. It feels like it's scene for scene, and I think the same animation team worked on Dota. Here's the thing, though. I think Arcane works so much better than Dota because Arcane is about characters. It takes its time to establish each character, what they want and who they are, and what they're willing to do to get what they want, and how they change. Dota 2 is more about the story than the characters. I'm not saying the characters don't change or whatever, but they're kind of characters in the same way that Marvel does characters. They feel kind of quippy and very, like, super confident and one note.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because I don't know how you could translate MOBA gameplay. Like, you can't really translate MOBA gameplay to a movie or a show or whatever. So you have to rely on the characters. And I think maybe the characters in League of Legends are a little bit more developed.
And it's just I don't understand, because there's so much lore behind these characters. Like, the Invoker is one of my favorite characters to play in Dota. Back when I played Dota, before it started hurting my computer. He, in the show, is like, oh, I had a daughter with this goddess, and then we got divorced, I guess, and then my daughter died. And now I'm sad, and I'm going to rid the world of worship for this goddess because of... I don't even remember why. Me, personally, Callum. I don't remember why he's doing it. He's just doing it. But the lore behind the Invoker is that he was, like, the greatest student of Magic ever. The reason that he can use so many spells in the game is because he memorized those spells. He invented some of them. Yeah. And, like, that's who he is. In the show, they don't even talk about, like, how he's this powerful magician, I don't think. They're just like, oh, he has a dead daughter, isn't that sad? And it's like, you don't need to make this a sad character.
Yeah.
There are plenty of sad characters in this game.
Yeah. Character that I personally think is sad is Clinks, the bone guy, the bone archer. Because if I remember his backstory correctly, he was like tasked to take out a dragon, and a wizard was like, hey, if you defeat the dragon, you'll get like immortality. And he killed the dragon, but then he like shot an arrow, and the arrow killed the dragon, but the dragon was breathing fire on him at the time. So
So that's why he's a flaming skeleton now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story, actually. That's the kind of thing that you would love to see explored outside of the MOBA gameplay, because the gameplay is not going to give you any details, right? There's not much in the way of story progression at all, when you're playing a MOBA. But that's a really interesting premise for a character who's like, hey, I'm going to kill the dragon. He kills it, but as he kills it, the dragon fire incinerates him, and therefore, at the moment of his victory, when he should be like, hey, I've done it, I've become immortal, he gets turned into a skeleton.
Yeah, there are so many more interesting characters than Davion the Dragon Knight. Why did you pick him? Why is this whole story about saving the dragons? Who cares? Why is Terrorblade the bad guy?
I have no idea, man. I have no idea.
It's just... the choices you made for this are so weirdly restrictive, because you've kind of picked the most boring characters from your game. There are so many... there is literally a bug who can weave time. Why are we not learning about him? I want a story about Clockwork. He's my favorite.
Do you think what they could have done is like what they do with Overwatch? One of the reasons why people love Overwatch is not because necessarily the gameplay is that good, but Blizzard, before the Cold Company turned out to be kind of rotten from the head down, did an amazing job of contextualizing everything about the game. It's actually amazing that they didn't make a movie about Overwatch characters, because I feel like...
well, they were going to. That's how Overwatch started. Yeah, they were going to make a movie. Apparently they were going to make a game, and then they were going to turn it into a movie, and then they needed to make money for the movie, so they made a game.
Well, I don't think the movie's happening.
That became Overwatch. Overwatch, I disagree with you. I think Overwatch has a great gameplay. I think one of the best things about it is its map design. All the maps are really well designed to be moved around in. But you're right, it did contextualize the characters a lot. But I don't think...
yeah,
that's necessary.
I mean, it might not be necessary, but I still think it's important, because think of, Team Fortress is a game that needs very little context to actually just play the game, right? But Valve still went out and put Meet the Team. They still made background material for the game that explains the story, even though you don't need any of that. So even if it's not strictly necessary, I think you still have to try to make an effort for it. And, people love Team Fortress.
I agree with you. I think Team Fortress and Overwatch, they're so much deeper experiences purely because we know a little bit more of the characters. Stuff we don't necessarily need to know, but we know it now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would have been necessary for Dota 2 to make a good show.
No, I mean, there is lore.
Yeah, there's lore to work off of. I don't know anything about Arcane. I didn't know anything about League of Legends backstory and stuff. I've played maybe 5 League games in my entire life. Arcane blew me away.
Is it because... Do you think that it's because they kept deeply with the lore of League of Legends, or is it because they actually just told a compelling story with the skin of League of Legends on top?
Well, I don't know enough about the lore to make that claim. But I will say that I think a lot of the decisions they made were good ones. In a very similar vein, the Dota 2 and League of Legends shows both take several members of the cast of characters rather than all of them, and try and tell a smaller story amongst those ones. The difference being that in the Dota 2 show, it splits up the story between several of the cast members that are doing different things in different places, whereas all of the cast members in Arcane are in the same city, but different parts of the city, showing different aspects of life in that city. It's a far more enclosed story that shows you how it's sympathetic for certain characters who are considered villainous to be fighting against the upper crust, and how the upper powers aren't necessarily always working with the best intentions of the city in mind, but some of them are. and they have to make hard decisions to maintain their power so that they can help people, but also not abuse their power just to maintain it. And it's an interesting, almost political drama with three different parts of the city, the sort of like middlemen being the cop and Poison, I think her name is, trying to sort of like bridge the gap between the two, whereas Dota 2, they're just kind of people.
So let me ask you this. So it sounds like it's actually a really compelling show, but do you think that if we took out the League of Legends stuff, do you think the show would still be as good?
Yeah, I think
So the question I'm driving at here is, was it actually necessary to adapt League of Legends to tell that? Because it sounds like they had a really compelling story already worked out, and they just, I'm not going to say slap the skin on it, but it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like maybe either the lore of League of Legends is expansive enough that this whole story was waiting to be told, or maybe the League of Legends was not as necessary to the core identity of the show. Because if you're saying it's like a political drama, then maybe they could have made something else,
I think there's a third option.
Which is?
I think they made a compelling show, but they used the lore of League of Legends to really enhance it. Like,
so,
character... Well, let me just... how League of Legends, in the universe, magic is kind of wild and unpredictable and not really used in the main cities, and they're trying to use it as basically a renewable energy source, and someone does, and it changes everything. I don't think that necessarily you needed League of Legends to tell that story, but it does help because I'm sure that's an actual part of League's lore.
Yeah, it sounds like just like how making a video game is this interaction of good gameplay and good, story elements. It sounds like the adaptation process is also a tug and pull between wanting to tell a good story and also being able to understand and adapt the material that you're working from. That's what it sounds like. That there is that fundamental, push and pull, because there are elements that would, can you imagine if they had tried to make the MOBA gameplay experience part of the show?
Please, God, no.
Yeah.
Half of the show is a Russian 9-year-old screaming slurs at you.
Yeah, arguably moving away from the actual material would have been a good idea, because adapting the material as it stood would be a terrible idea.
Well, that's why when we talked earlier about, say, Halo, and whether or not you should adapt the games or the books, I think what you should do, if there are no books to adapt, is try and find a way to write this game as a book would be written. Don't do a whole book, because that takes time. But in your head, how would you structure a book based on this game? And then base your show on that.
If I could summarize my feeling about the Halo show, the problem, and I think this again talks to context, is it feels like they came up with an idea for a sci-fi show with an alien faction and a human faction and a bunch of super soldiers and stuff like that. Then they got the Halo license and put the Halo skin on top of it. It doesn't feel like the story was originally designed thinking about what Halo is supposed to be and what it's about. Now, granted, I am somewhat glad that they still made the show, because if the Halo show wasn't... Because, if they could make at least a show and have it not do too badly, then it opens up the realm for future adaptations and future work. Because one of the major problems with Halo is that, Neil Blomkamp and... Neil Blomkamp was, supposedly going to direct a Halo movie, and that thing was, in development hell for years, and it never ever got made. And I think normalizing the idea that you could try, because it's not the worst show in the world. It's just not the show that I wanted,
Yeah.
Out of the Halo franchise, right? I'm sure that if it had been a completely different franchise, a completely different IP, actually, in kind of a weird way, it almost feels like it would have made a better Mass Effect show than a Halo show, if that makes any sense.
Really?
I feel like elements of that storytelling that they do in Halo could have actually been retooled more interestingly to tell a side story from Mass Effect. than an actual Halo story. I think that's my own feeling.
I'm trying to recall now. There was another thing I was thinking about that's also kind of been in development hell for a while. It's another... This is gonna bother me for hours. Keep talking while I think.
Yeah, it's important to, adaptations are hard. I'm not going to sit here on my golden horse and pretend that it's super duper easy to make a TV show, to tell a compelling story, to do all of that kind of stuff. It's not. It's actually really hard to do. However, I still think that when you make an attempt to do it, you should at least try to balance between being faithful to the source material and not. And I think another problem that comes up with this is like, who's it for, right? Remember we talked about how in a game...
Oh, I just remembered.
Oh, go ahead.
Magic the Gathering.
Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, there was rumblings about a Magic the Gathering Netflix show coming out. I think it might still be coming out in like a year or two.
Oh my goodness.
But Magic the Gathering is another thing that tells its story weirdly, because it tells its story through the cards. Okay, because every card in Magic has a rarity, from common, uncommon, rare, and mythic rare. Mythic rare and rare cards are given that rarity because they tend to be depicting an event or a character that's important to the story of that set.
Ah, okay. I didn't know
and
that.
That's why the spells have some weird names sometimes, or like a specific artwork.
So it's not just a spell, it's an event.
It's a moment.
A moment, yeah.
Because the main premise behind the Magic the Gathering game is that every player is a planeswalker, and every card that they play is a spell or a memory of something that happened that they're invoking in a fight with another planeswalker.
I see.
So, taking that and also the oodles and oodles and oodles of books that Magic the Gathering has of varying qualities, what would they even adapt? Do you start with the Gatewatch? The, like, kind of main group of planeswalkers for a while?
I feel like they have to tell an original story in the universe. I think that's maybe the direction that they'd have to go to. Because there's too much stuff
I don't think they can. Is the problem. Is because, like, how do you ignore all of that story? There's so much, from the war with Phyrexia in Old Dominaria, to the Brothers' War, to the creation of Yawgmoth and Phyrexia in general, to, like, Mirrodin becoming New Phyrexia, and Kamigawa and the Kami War and everything. It's like, there's so much going on in terms of history and story and stuff. It's a 30-year-old property. How do you ignore 30 years of story?
I don't think you have to ignore it, but I don't think you need to really acknowledge a lot of it either. I think, a great example of adaptation is like the new Dune. Denis Villeneuve, I think, did an amazing job adapting a series that is notorious for being hard to adapt. And he did it in a way, the way that he did it was that he got the vibe correct. He doesn't slow the movie down so that like characters can talk about the Holtzman effect or this thing or that thing. He gets the vibe of Dune correct, and I think that's how you're allowed to do it, right? If the material is too big, you can't like adapt, specifics. You can't tell the entire story in one go. I think what you have to do is you have to get the vibe correct, and to do that you have to understand the medium that you're working from, right? You have to understand what Magic the Gathering is like. You need to get the vibe of the game down. Then you can turn it into an original story in the wider context of the universe.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it's too big.
If I could make one suggestion, because I heard something... Well, two suggestions. If I could make two suggestions, because I heard something from a friend that I deeply hope isn't true, is that they were planning on adapting The War of the Spark.
I don't know what that is.
The War of the Spark was a set that came out that was a really big deal because it was basically this one evil dragon is calling all of the planeswalkers to one plane so that he can basically kill them all.
So it's like there can only be a Highlander situation.
It's a Highlander Avengers Endgame kind of situation because the Gatewatch is there and people
Okay.
are forming alliances and stuff. And that would be a terrible thing to adapt.
Yeah.
Because, again, the only reason the Avengers movies worked is because they had several movies before that establishing all of the characters.
Yep.
You can't assume that the people who are watching your show know all of these characters, especially when the War of the Spark was mainly told through a series of trading cards and a book.
Yeah, everyone wants to make the Avengers, no one wants to make Iron Man 1.
Yeah, exactly. My second suggestion, the first suggestion is don't fucking do that. My second suggestion is make a fish out of water story. Have one original character, like Emilio suggested earlier, but have them interact with every other character. So they discover their Planeswalker Spark somewhere, and Planeswalk away, and they get introduced to Chandra, or Jace, or Liliana, or whatever, and they have to learn what being a Planeswalker means, and develop their own powers and stuff.
So,
'Cause then-
like Avatar The Last Airbender.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Because
So-
Aang is the fish out of water, but he
Yeah,
shouldn't be.
he's from 100 years ago.
Yeah, so, yeah, that, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe
then
that
you
could be
can
an
have
idea.
someone explain all the context very naturally.
Yeah.
Introduce all your characters to all your audience to the world through this one character. And then you can set up for a big event like the Phyrexian War or the War of the Spark
Well,
or whatever the fuck happened in Eldraine.
I think one of the problems is that, like, these shows don't know necessarily if they're going to have a second season. With their with the massive wave of cancellations done by HBO recently, like, a lifespan of a show is not as solid as as it once seemed. Things are a lot more volatile than they used to be. So I think one thing that works against these against this content production is that it's like you don't know necessarily if you're actually going to have the space you need to tell the story you want to,
Very true.
and therefore you end up telling the story you can, which is
Yes. However, I think that if you look at it slightly differently, what Wizards of the Coast is getting out of this show is very determined on what kind of show that they make for this first season. If they just make it big and flashy and like a super fight between already established characters no one knows, then no one's going to care about it. Everyone's going to hate it. It's going to be forgotten in a week or something. If they make a show that introduces audience members to the world of Magic's Gathering, to the Blind Eternities, then don't laugh.
no, I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing.
I was about to say, don't laugh at the Blind Eternities, my man. You like Halo.
That's true. I have no legs to stand on.
Yeah. You have no legs to flood on. Nah, that was bad. But if you have a show that introduces them to the concept of the game, then you're going to get people that want to play your game more.
Do you think the adage that we started with is like, hey, game developer, when you're making a game, you kind of have to assume that the person who's playing the game has never played a video game? Do you think maybe a rule for adaptations is like, hey, don't make the adaptation with the assumption that the people who are going to be watching it are like intimately familiar with everything? At least
think
the first version of that thing, because you can do that once you've established yourself. But if you're making the first iteration of a thing, like the first Halo TV show or the first Magic movie or whatever, do you think it's maybe better to do it like that?
No, I think you kind of have to go half and half. You have to have blatantly obvious stuff that helps newer viewers get introduced to the world. But it's a good idea to also have some sort of background stuff for returning fans.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, have, if a character has like a special item from one of their adventures in a comic that they were in, then have that item sitting on their desk or something.
Yeah, you can do it in very small ways. You don't have to have the plot slow down while the characters explain a totally separate mission that they've done. They can just have a thing on their desk, like you said. It's like, hey, if you're a fan, then you'll know what that is. But if you're not a fan, then it's not like an important detail.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing to do this with is superheroes.
Oh yeah, because there's a lot of stuff with superheroes. There's a lot of comics.
Yeah, because I tried to follow just one superhero's story, right?
Mm-hmm.
That superhero showed up in like 8 different kinds of comics. And it was never like Origins 1 or whatever. It was they'd show up in Legion 1 and then X-Men Origins Wolverine 237 and then Heroes of the Earth 17, and it's like, why?
Yeah, I tried keeping up with the Green Lantern comics, and
God.
I couldn't do it because it turns out Hal Jordan is a Green Lantern in general just shows up, whenever someone stubs their toe on a green rock, a lantern is there, snickering about how willpower is the best power, or whatever.
Yeah.
I like Green Lantern, but it's kind of garbage sometimes.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think the conclusion we've come to is that context is important. But did we ever answer the question how much context is enough context? Do you need more information to make a show or a piece of media adaptation or whatever better? Or is less information better?
I think it depends on the type. I think it depends on 2 things. The type of story that you're going to tell. 3 things. The type of story that you're going to tell, where in the sort of media that you're trying to tell it, and what type of adaptation you're going for, right? A movie has a shorter runtime than a TV show, so you've got to be a lot more punchy, right? I feel like if they made a Halo movie, some of the problems with the TV show would actually go away, because they could cut out a lot of the fat. But if you're making the first thing of that media, I think you have to maybe dial it back a little bit. You can't immediately jump into, like, for example, the Planeswalker Endgame type thing. And I think the final one is, what are you trying to tell? Because the other issue, as you brought up with Arcane, is you need to have a story. You cannot just adapt. Very rarely can you just adapt a video game and have the story of the video game be perfect for movies. I don't think that's remotely possible.
Because the story of the video game requires that you play it, that you take action in it.
Yeah, unless you're adapting like a walking simulator or something.
It's like how I don't necessarily think that Link would be a good character in a show because he's a blank slate.
No, Link is like the Master Chief of Nintendo. Link should not...
Unless it's Wind Waker.
He should show up in the background, but there should be another character that you're following. Maybe they should follow Zelda.
Tingle.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to follow Tingle in his adventures to find a leotard that fits.
You can tell the episode has been going on a while because that's where we're at right now.
Yo, because we brought up Tingle again. We've invoked the Tingle.
Nintendo, don't copyright us.
You can try. Tingle will protect me. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the medium is important. I think the kind of story is important because, like we said earlier, Dark Souls wouldn't work well if you had a character that told you everything. It's a story that works best when you decide how immersed you want to be, but it provides enough context for you to still be interested in the world. I think it is very, very necessary for telling a good story that you give some sort of context, and whether that's establishing what your story is going to be or just like a bit of information about the world to keep you going. There are still games out there that don't give you any context. I mean, I told you I played Raven's Hike a while back. That didn't tell you anything. And it was just like, yes, I read the store page, and that's the only... It had 2 sentences of story, and that's the only time I'd ever gotten any story from that game. And it's like, you have to go to the top of the tower to save the world. And it's like, from what? Oh, the devastation. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, you can get away with it in a game, because it's the player experience. You can't get away with it in any other medium. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right.
So-
Well, I think we've figured it out.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, the true message of this video is that the Dead or Alive movie kind of slaps.
I've never played a Dead or Alive game.
Yeah, me either. The movie was good.
Maybe that's why. Maybe if you were a real fan of the games, the movie would be weird. But yeah, this has been a really fun episode. We've talked a lot about different types of media. The strategy on the channel moving forward is Callum and I are going to be making more content individually, but we come together for these podcasts because
Like the Halo games and the Halo novels.
yeah. So we can talk about stuff that's not necessarily as important, but also
it's just stuff that we need to discuss with someone.
yeah, exactly. This is not a video essay type material because I want to have someone tell me, no, Emilio, you're wrong. Master Chief does need to take off his helmet. 50 bajillion
No,
times.
you don't understand. He needs to. I have to be able to see if he's a boring straight white guy.
Well, I mean, there's like a sex scene in the Halo show. and
God.
he has to,
Why?
They show his ass. So
Halo,
he has to take his
Master
helmet. It would be. I would respect the show a lot more if he kept the helmet on.
yeah. The helmet stays on. Because Master Chief is basically a man-child, right?
Well, he was abducted when he was a child. Literally, the government made a clone of him and then like switched
All the
him for the
clones
clone.
died.
And then the clones died. It's like, yeah, he's been a child soldier since he was like 11 or something crazy like that. So yeah, he should. Actually, that's
This
a good point because like that's why he has a relationship with Cortana because Cortana is the person he spends the most amount of time with. It's like in his head, talking.
Yeah, and also, Cortana never expects any kind of intimacy from him.
Yeah, because she's AI.
She's AI. He never has to delve into feelings or do anything. Because literally, this is a character that only knows how to do war.
Yeah.
That's all he was made for. He can't interact with people. That's his whole thing. That's why no one likes the Spartans. Because dealing with them is like dealing with human robots.
Well, people idolize them. I don't.
But no one like is comfortable around them.
I mean, they're like, this is like again Halo deep lore. Like John is a Spartan too, so he was abducted, but the later Spartans were not. The later Spartans were just regular people that they augmented.
Oh,
So-
yeah, no, I'm talking about the Spartan 2s.
Yeah, the Spartan 2s are all like really weird people because they're like mega super soldiers. And they're all obviously like a lot stronger and more capable than the Spartan 4s. But it also means they're kind of really strange because they don't spend time talking. Like, again, another reason why Halo works is because you don't spend time with other people. Even when you're like in a ship full of people, you very rarely spend time with like other people, other NPCs, other characters. It's usually a quick segment and then there's a cutscene. And then you go to the next segment where you blast enemies. It's not like you spend the whole time talking to someone else. Not like Gears of War, where it's like a squad of bros chugging brewskis and lancing like.
What's up, bro? Your wife's still dead? Hell yeah, bro.
Yeah.
Weirdly, I think the Halo games aren't very well written.
Ooh, okay.
But-
That's the thing I would have to fight you on.
I don't think they're poorly written. I just don't think that... Like, I never connected with Halo through the story. I always connected with Halo through the gameplay and the music.
I connect with it actually mostly through the story and then through the music and the gameplay. I can take or leave actually.
So basically, the takeaway from this podcast episode is that Emilio and I both love Halo music.
Yeah, and we're both really weird when it comes to the because like my favorite Halo game is actually Halo Wars, which is a strategy game.
Emilio, please leave my house. My favorite Halo game is Halo 3 because you finish the fight.
Yeah, the fight should have stayed finished. Anyway, before we
But then you wouldn't get ODST or Wars. They all came after Halo 3.
well, technically chronologically they happened while Halo 3 is going on or before Halo 3.
Yes, but Emilio, chronologically in the actual human time in which they were released, they came after Halo 3.
Yeah, fair enough. We one day we have to do an episode where it's just like talking about spin-offs that are like we really like, because a lot of my favorite games are spin-offs of the main series.
Oh, I just thought. Okay, I'll talk to you about this afterwards. But we have plans coming up. Don't worry about it. Speaking of plans coming up, if you want to take a deeper look at some of our plans, go and check out the Patreon. Because that's where we post videos generally the earliest, and also some of the maybe more spoilery, kind of bloopery contents from these episodes that might have hidden leaks about future episodes.
Yeah. Also, we have loads of bonus essays on there. If you've ever seen any of my video essays, all of those have a companion video, at least the more recent ones. Companion video on the Patreon where I talk about some weird stuff that I wanted to put in the video, but I couldn't find the space for. So,
And as soon as I figure out how, I'm going to start doing Patreon-only streams where I will, I don't know, play games with my hands in buckets of water. I really don't know how we're going to do that, but it will happen one day, so make sure that you're there for it.
yeah, or you can buy us a coffee. That's good as well.
I do love coffee. Or if you don't want to do any of that stuff, but you still want to contribute to the channel, sharing, subscribing, and liking, and also commenting is probably the best way you can do that. Because it just gets us so much more interaction. We're like, what, 150-something people away from being monetized?
Yeah. Also, if you're listening to this on the podcast app, give us a review. That would really help us as well, because this episode will be on the podcast app as well.
Yeah, if you're on Spotify, give us a review, give us a like. Give us a follow and a favorite, and tell us what you think that we should, talk about next.
Yeah,
you can reach us
your
at our
favorite
Twitter.
Halo game?
Yeah, what's your favorite Halo novel? Do it.
And we
tell us.
We have a Discord as well.
Yeah, we have a Discord, a Twitter, and an Instagram. You can find the links to those probably in the description of this video, but if not, definitely on our channel.
Yeah, we have a fun community, guys. I highly recommend that you check out some of these people. They're very talented. Some of them are really cool artists.
Yeah, they're excellent. You should definitely go and interact with them more. Thank you so much for watching. I don't know what the next video topic is going to be about, but it'll definitely come out next month, probably.
Probably. Look out for more video essays coming soon.
Yes, look out for less videos from me coming soon.
Bye.
Somehow. Bye-bye.